welcome everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar session. I can see already some of you have familiarized yourself with the chat function. It's great to hear from all of you. And already I see there's some individuals from Chile, Joburg. So welcome all the way from Gauteng. And there are many of you from across the country. So thanks for joining today's session. Today's session, we're looking at the retail furniture sector outlook, and we'd like to welcome our esteemed panel. We have Chris Gilmore, who is an investment analyst, Yanni Vosloo from MRP Home, Chris Swart from TFG at Home, Stefan Nieuwoud from JD Group, and Bernadette Isaacs from Safi. Today's event is proudly partnered between the Ethekwini Furniture Cluster, Safi, and the African Institute of Interior Design Professions. And obviously, today couldn't happen without the support of our wonderful funders. So a big shout out to the Ethekwini Sector Programs Unit and Trade and Investment KZN. We thank you so much for your support. Great, so a little bit of housekeeping for all of you. Usually at this stage in a workshop or anything in live, I would have pointed you to the direction of the bathrooms. However, we're on Zoom, so I'll have to point you to the direction of the Zoom chat and the Q&A function. We have enabled a Q&A option for today's webinar. So if you have any questions for our panel throughout the session, please feel free to use that function and ask any questions you may have. There's also an option to upvote any questions. So if there's a specific question that someone has asked that you feel you'd really like a response to, you're welcome to vote for that question. We also have a chat function, which I would encourage you to use if you are not posing a question and would just like to make commentary. And we will be monitoring both, but please, if you could save the questions for the Q&A function, that would be great. We really enjoy you sort of sharing who you are and getting to know who else is on the call. So please feel free to use the chat function for that. Right, so without further ado, let's get cracking. I'm going to hand over to our investment analyst, Chris Gilmore, and he's going to be talking about the financial impact of COVID-19 on the outlook of the furniture sector, retail furniture sector over the next 12 months. So Chris, can I hand over to you?
Paige, thank you very much indeed. Just a health warning here. What I'm about to say is going to be pretty bleak, and I make no apologies for it. It's a pretty bleak outlook. That's the first point. Secondly, I've got quite a few slides, so I'm going to rattle through them at breakneck pace. But if you want to have a look at them at your leisure, Paige, I believe these are going to be made available after the presentation, so you can go through these at your leisure. Okay, this really is GDP, the outlook for South African GDP, depending on whether or not we get what's called a double hit. In other words, if we get a second wave of infection or not. If we get a single hit, we don't get a double hit, then I think it's likely we're going to get about -8, -9% this year, seasonally adjusted. Could be a bit higher than that. We're only going to get in the second quarter GDP figure, I think on the 4th of September or thereabouts, and it's going to be bad. It's going to be really, really bad indeed. Maybe 30% down quarter on quarter, 39% down. That's the consensus view, I think. So you get a double hit, you get a second wave, and that makes it even worse, as you can see from this slide. The government has thrown a lot of money at the virus, and there's a bit of confusion about how much they've actually thrown at it. A lot of people talk about 500 billion. In fact, if you strip away the bank funding, the discretionary bank funding, which very little has been taken up at present, that takes it down to about 300 billion. It's still a lot of money, and relative to the other emerging markets out there, it's probably the highest of any emerging market as a percentage of GDP. So it's a huge commitment. However, it's not particularly well targeted, and relies on, should I say, it's not well targeted, and the it relies on a smooth exit from lockdown. And what's happening with lockdown, as I'm sure you're aware, is it's a bit messy. You're getting a lot of micromanagement of the economy, and it's patchy. Unemployment rising rapidly from an already very, very high base. South Africa has the highest persistent rate of unemployment of any country in the world. And the TERS benefits are finishing soon, I think this week, in fact. So beyond that, going into September, you're going to find an awful lot more unemployed people. It's going to be very, very tough. Your debt to GDP is going to soon be around about 81%. And the forecasts are that within two to 3 years, if nothing is done about reining in civil servant salaries, for example, we could be looking at 140%. It's completely unsustainable at levels like this. So I think we're going to be looking at tax rises coming through pretty shortly. So the severe lockdown has had a lasting negative impact on the economy. Retail sales figures, we got the latest retail sales figures out last week from Stats SA. Down almost 50% in April, bouncing back in May, still negative to the tune of about 7.5%, so certainly not out of the woods yet. Yeah, that's the fiscal response that I mentioned. South Africa, around about 8% of GDP. It's huge relative to its peers in the emerging markets, and it's actually on a par with countries like Canada and Spain, for example. Just a kind of visual representation of many of the furniture retailers out there. When I was a sell-side analyst, there were many more companies listed. So a lot of them have left the boards now. I mean, in those days you had Ellerins and the like. So on the left-hand side, OK, Lewis and JD, what I would refer to as the more traditional type of large-scale mass market furniture retailers, many of which rely on credit to push their sales. Now here I've got to inject a little bit of humor into the whole thing. About 15 years ago at a JD Group presentation, there was a chap called Gerald Folkel who was the CFO, and he made this wonderful comment. He said, if only we could get rid of this pesky furniture, we could make an awful lot more money. He was talking about financial services. And I think the goalposts have changed a bit in the past 10, 15 years. Back in about 2010, I went with Alistair MacArthur, who was then the CEO of Mr. Price, and Mark Blair, who's the current CEO, and we went around a few furniture outlets in Joburg and Durban, and I was blown away by what was happening at Mr. Price Home. I didn't realize, even 10 years ago, how far they had advanced and the kind of things that they were selling. So that's why I say I think the whole landscape has changed, is changing, and it's moving away from a more, how can I put it, a financial services oriented base to something where product is infinitely more important. There we have Valence up in the top right-hand corner. No Weatherlys, unfortunately. That's sadly gone with the demise of Ellerins. SA retail sales growth, and you can see the big slump there on the right-hand side, minus 49.9%, as I mentioned earlier, bouncing back a little bit, but we're still heavily in negative territory. And we're going to be getting the next figures out in the middle of September, and that's going to be absolutely fascinating. So the consumer's been hit really hard hit. This just gives a segmental breakdown of the various parts of the various components of retail sales. And if you look at furniture there, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 along, you can see it took a massive hit in April and May. But in June, you see it's the only component of South African retail sales that actually is in positive territory to the tune of about 13%. So I think you've got big pent-up demand coming through there. And people still in June had money. So I think they've been going out there and spending it on furniture. The question is, how long is that going to last? This is Bank Serve Africa's take-home pay index, and Mike Schussler of economists.coza is their in-house economist. And he's pretty bleak in the outlook. He made the comment, I think a couple of weeks ago when this last graph came out, that something like 20% of people in the country didn't take home a paycheck in June. So you can see that things are really tightening up on the supply side as far as the discretionary spend is concerned. Just for comparative purposes, in the UK, you're seeing a similar type of pattern, though nowhere near the depth. You went to about minus 20% year on year in terms of retail sales, bouncing back quite nicely. In the US, you get a very similar pattern, but in the US, you're into positive territory now. A lot of that is predicated on what's been happening with that $600 per week paycheck, which is now gone. That's left. Donald Trump has reinstated that with he's trying to replace it with a $400 a week check, $100 from the state, $300 from the federal government, but that hasn't been ratified yet. So I think a lot of that may be under pressure in the US, but certainly a nice big bounce. But again, look at the depth, nowhere near the 50% drop that you saw in South Africa. And I think the South African situation really reflecting that incredibly severe lockdown with which the economy had to contend. Here's China, where it all started. And you can see, again, the big slump. Even now, even in June, and that's the latest figures we've got, even in July, I think, we're still not back into positive territory. The Chinese consumer really hasn't got an appetite for coming back and buying as yet. Yes, the manufacturing's up and running. It's getting pretty much back to normal. But when it comes to the consumer, the Chinese authorities are really struggling to get the Chinese to spend. And again, the similar type of pattern in Europe, the big bounce into negative territory, coming back, getting back to close to being positive. As with the clothing, footwear and textile sector, I suspect what may happen after all this is finished, we'll get more and more clamoring for local manufacture of certain items. Look, it's more difficult, I think, with furniture than it is with CFTA. There perhaps isn't the legacy, the institutional memory when it comes to furniture manufacture. Although I suspect some of you guys on the panel might disagree with that comment. In CFTA, and CFTL, should I say, clothing, footwear, textile, and leather, I think there is undoubtedly, and has been already, a bit of a change with respect to onshoring and re-establishing local supply chains. So I think there's certainly space for it in other areas. And I think with the rise in anti-Chinese sentiment that's going to continue even after the virus is gone, that there may be some scope for that. And really, this is just to conclude. I think, as I said, the furniture component is the only growth component that was apparent in the retail sales figures in June. Major pent-up demand apparent in May and in June, and especially in June. That furniture retail landscaping has changed, and I think it's going to continue to change. Product, I think, is critically important. The South African economy, unlikely to rebound significantly from here on in. And I think once we get into September, once the tourist payments have gone, then I think we've got an extra 3 million people from an already incredibly high base, which is going to make it very, very difficult to get consumer spending up and running. I mean, the kind of anecdotal experience we're getting with the bottle stores opening yesterday. There weren't the massive queues that people expected, I think largely because it's not payday yet, and people are just so incredibly cash strapped. So that discretionary spend, I think, is going to remain very, very tight for the foreseeable future. So I warned you, it is a pretty bleak outlook, and I hope I've done that within the prescribed 10 minutes page.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chris. Yes, you're perfectly to time, so well done. Chris is actually chatting to us all the way from Scotland. So it's amazing what we can do when we use technology. Chris, thanks so much for sharing those insights. As you mentioned, slightly bleak, if not very, but it's important for us to have a little bit of a reality check as to what's happening in the future. I know for many retailers and manufacturers, things are going really well right now, but we don't know how long it's going to last. So hopefully after today's session, we've all got a better idea and a better perspective of where we think the industry is going. So thanks so much, Chris. Thanks for sharing that and taking the time to chat to us today. I'm going to move on to our panel discussion. We've got a great set of questions. And again, I really encourage all of the attendees of the session to utilize the Q&A function if there's any specific questions you'd like to pose to the panel. So I'd like to start with chatting to Chris Swart from TFG at Home. Chris, what has the impact of COVID been on demand for furniture that you've noticed?
Right, thank you, and thanks for this opportunity. I think it's invaluable for all of us to get together to discuss this particular issue at this time in South Africa. I think Mr. Chris Gilmore did a very good job at telling us at a macro level what happened in the South African retail economy, and that very much translates into what the demand was like. The minus 50% decline in April, I think any furniture retailer would have liked the minus 50%, because the reality is we were pretty much down 100% for a period of up to 8 weeks, where we did absolutely zero sales. The pent-up demand after that came back very strong. And what we're seeing now since June, July, more towards July and August, is this uneasy return to an almost new normal, but we don't really know what that new normal is like yet. There's no doubt that there's a lot of fear and anxiety in the consumer market. People are scared to spend because they don't know what's coming. They don't know if the second lockdown or second wave is coming, so people are worried about spending. But certainly what we've seen in the furniture market is a resilience that we did not necessarily expect post-lockdown. And that was because people had to redefine what their homes were. In the past, the homes was the place that you went to after work. Now it's the place that you are at work. People are working from home, kids are doing schoolwork from home. Dining rooms had to be repurposed into family offices. Bedrooms had to be readjusted. And don't forget, people have spent a lot more time at home than they probably ever had in the past. So you could see, and you can see it in the building industry, the home improvement retailers. You can see how busy those guys are. A lot of people are changing their homes, upgrading their homes. So I think the demand is also different in different sectors of the economy. Not everybody is facing unemployment. Not everybody has taken a hit on their paycheck. A lot of people aren't able to do the things that they would have spent money on in the past. There are no overseas trips this year. There are no expensive holidays. So people are spending more time at home. So within that, yes, there was a massive decline in demand that came back very strong post-lockdown, and now there's a settling of where we're going to go to. But the opportunities and the demand will be in the redefinition of how people view their homes. So within all this pessimism, there's still opportunities to find. But you have to look for those pockets of opportunities rather than servicing an entire market.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for sharing that. And as you mentioned, there's different pockets of opportunities in different markets, and different markets respond differently. And also touching on what Chris Gilmore mentioned in his presentation about the different types of retailers. The next question to Stefan from JD Group. Stefan, JD Group services quite significantly the lower LSM consumer. What impact has COVID had on that consumer, and why do you think that's the case?
Yes, thank you, Paige. Thank you for the opportunity to engage with industry. I think you pretty much saw it in one of Chris's slides. It's probably a little bit too soon to actually ask that question. Due to the pent-up demand, on my notes here, the very first point I made, bullet point A, is pent-up demand. So you must see the answer in the context of a terrible April and May, as Chris has just said as well. And coming out of that, there's a pent-up demand. There's that, what I see some of the retailers call a homebody economy. So yes, people spend a lot more time at home, and therefore want to make their home a safer and better place to stay at. And obviously there's also a bit of cash in hand because of TERS payouts. Some of that money landed in the pocket of our consumer, also because of the fact that a lot of our consumers had less expenditure over the last couple of months. They didn't necessarily have travel costs, and I think some people also didn't have necessarily educational costs. So there's definitely cash in hand, pent-up demand, and people wanting to spend more money on their homes. So we're seeing a bit of a spike. We're all having a good run at this stage. See that in the context, once again, unfortunately, of April and May. So anticipation is, if you look at the events coming up in the next couple of months, from a manufacturing point of view, if you have to start thinking about whether you're going to start up a night shift or not, the balancing factor here is that you're probably going to have, there's Black Friday coming. We always have a peak, October, November, December. Depending on how much money is still available in the market, how much cash, I think we might expect a bit of a peak again there. You must probably ask us this question again in January, February, because I think Chris has said it. If you look at the fundamentals, people forget that we were in a technical recession just before COVID. If you look at the fundamentals, there's really nothing at this stage that tells us that the end is not nigh. It is close, definitely. So even though we're having, when is the end? I don't know. And nobody else probably does around the table at this stage. But certainly I don't expect the run to last forever. It will run for a while, but January, February, I think we might come to a bit of a grinding out, unfortunately.
Yeah, thanks, Stefan. I know you mentioned there might be another peak in with Black Friday. And I know we haven't necessarily discussed this, but what impact do you think COVID has had on the seasonality of furniture?
Yeah, it's you know, for most of us, we've seen that our peak has moved a little bit from where it used to be traditionally in December. Black Friday has had an impact on that, so it definitely moved closer to November, and took a little bit away from Christmas sales. I'm talking specifically the lower end of the market, not necessarily in the markets that Chris and Yanni would talk to. But because of the fact that we virtually had no trading for the period of April and May, there's definitely a bit of an artificial spike at this stage. So hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, great. Thanks, Stefan. Thanks. Yanni, we've spoken a lot about what furniture demand is currently looking like, but maybe you could shed a bit of light on where you foresee the demand going over the next 12 months.
I think before I respond to the question, just to Stefan, 100% agree with you on your take on what Black Friday has done and what it will potentially do, because absolutely that peak has moved away from Christmas sales for our market as well. So spot on with that one. In terms of answering your question in regards to furniture demand and where we see it moving in the next 12 months, it does go back to the question that Chris from At Home answered in terms of the consumers' need analysis of their spend has absolutely shifted. So we anticipate very much, and I think it's true for the whole market, regardless of which sector you trade in, that there will definitely be a change in category mix. We're definitely experiencing and believe there will be a continued polarization of price point hierarchy away from the fat middle into both value opening price point on the one side and into closing price points on the other. And I think maybe that one is quite specific to our business based on the fact that we have quite a broad consumer base that buys into our brand. There's also very much a fabrication mix that is happening. And for me, one of the most important things is in terms of the local furniture market for us, it is moving away from the mass market board production, or actually not rather moving away, but adding on top of the mass market board production, definitely a need to explore and expand the volumes that you're driving locally in hardwoods and in mixed materials, because I think that's where the biggest opportunity sits. And we will speak later about what the importance of localization is and what it brings to the table. But I think that is what will fuel the move into the local market quite predominantly so.
Thanks, Yanni. Thanks for sharing your perspective. And it's very interesting about the different product category mixes, and sounds like there's definitely a need to innovate in that space as well.
And like other Chris said before, it is its product has become the hero. And I think that is one of the things that we extremely excited about for the whole market, because the customer absolutely demands the right fashionability, the right end use. And I think the fact that end use is most probably one of the most important factors and fit for purpose in the future scenario.
Brilliant. Thanks, Yanni. Thanks for sharing. Chris Swart, you had some interesting opinions on what the next 12 months look like, specifically around consumer behavior.
Yeah, and I think Yanni just touched on it as well. It's going to be a big focus on functionality, multifunctionality, and a big focus on comfort. And it's got to be the right styles. Now, within this, we can never forget that the consumer is still nervous and under pressure, and can only absorb so much of a price increase in this market. So we have to be careful with that. There's a limit that customers will not spend. However, within that, you can see there's a definite flight to quality as well. We've seen the higher quality products across the board, and not just in furniture and the other categories as well, because people are at home using and interacting with their homeware and their furniture more. You can see that they're looking for better quality, and they're buying up. So that polarization will continue. You know, to flight to value and a flight to quality, depending on where you sit in the spectrum. And I think the opportunities are there, have come together in a way that it's never come together before for homeware and furniture in South Africa. That we're experiencing supply chain problems out of the Far East. The Chinese factories and the rest of the Far Eastern countries are facing capacity constraints on their manufacturing and on their exports, because the same trend that we're talking about in South Africa is taking place all over the world. So the North Americans and the Western Europeans are also facing an increase in furniture demand, so therefore longer lead times out of factories. Combine that with congested ports in Durban and in Cape Town, and you've got a constricted demand flowing into South Africa. If you have that, and you have a local economy, local manufacturing sector able to respond to these demands from the customer side and these demands from a retail side, there's a great opportunity for retailers, manufacturers, and designers and creatives to come together in South Africa and create something special in the market. Within the sea of uncertainty that's happening, there's still these opportunities that exist.
Brilliant. Thanks, Yanni, and thanks, Chris, for sharing that insight with us. Stefan, again, JD Group, you focus a lot more on the lower LSM, and Chris Gilmore touched on, you know, it being quite a credit-driven market. So I just wanted to find out, what impact do you think the recession will have on furniture credit, and therefore retailers and manufacturers over the next 12 months?
Yeah, and I realized that I used the terms grinding halt in my previous time I spoke, so I'll try and be more positive. I see both Yanni and Chris is a lot more positive, so I'll do my utmost to be more positive. Remember, I'm from HR, so we're a little bit, from our point of view, we're not salespeople. So credit at this stage, and Chris made reference to it in his presentation as well. Remember that once again, our market, looking at us specifically as JD Group, have significantly reduced our exposure to credit. Some of our competitors are still, if you look at the Lewis results, for instance, you would see that they are finding, at this stage, finding collections tough. It was in their results. So the expectation during the course of the next couple of months is certainly that, unfortunately, the key word in that question is recession. Recession equals job losses. Job losses equals less salaries, less money in the market. And from us operating in the end of the market that we do, it also means that we will be more conservative as far as credit granting is concerned. You will see higher deposit rates. It's already out in the market, higher deposit rates, so that the consumer will find it more difficult to get hold of debt. So I do expect that during the course of the next, certainly 6 to 12, 18 months, you will see a lot less debt in the market, and debt not being that readily available to the consumer, and unfortunately having an impact on certainly our end of the market as far as demand is concerned. Because like Chris rightly said, credit it is a tap that can be opened and closed, and that can fuel demand to a large extent, and I do not expect that tap to be open in the next 12 to 18 months.
Great, thanks, Stefan. And again, you know, sort of pulling on Chris Gilmore's presentation about, you know, the more we let credit run, the risk we have of, you know, bubbles bursting, and the similar situations to where Ellerene's closed recently. You know, we don't want the same thing, especially in how it could impact our manufacturers. Thanks, Stefan. The next question I'd just also like to pose to Chris Swart again. Chris, how will recession impact retail pricing and sourcing? I know we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but maybe you can just elaborate on that for me.
Well, the biggest impact in pricing in South Africa is the exchange rate, no doubt. No other factor is as dominant as that specific factor. Now, at 1740 or 1730 to the dollar, it's amazing how 1730 in the course of a year can actually feel better. You know, if somebody told me the last year that the dollar would be 1730, I wouldn't, you know, I would have had nightmares. But at 1730, it seemed to have found some sort of a level there that we can sustainably work with. But there's a level where South African consumers just can't pay over. So there will be pressure from a demand side on keeping prices lower, which will be more difficult to buy local product versus importing from the East. But like I said, on the other side, you can only sell something if you actually have it. And at the moment, there's pressure out of the East. So it's less about a conversation about how hard will the negotiations with local suppliers be, and more about a question of what will a local South African consumer be willing to spend and be able to spend. And I think we have to find each other on those questions. There's a minimum production cost that it costs to produce an item, and there's a certain threshold that a consumer will be able to spend. And I think we have to find each other on those two. It's not going to be an easy one, but within that mix, there will be opportunities of products that's in demand in the shift of the consumer behavior, and in the production capabilities that exists in South Africa. We should be able to find that, but you can rest assured there will be pressure from a consumer side not to be able to pay higher. Black Friday, Stefan, just to come back to you, it's as big in our lives at the higher end as it is that we've seen that same shift. We've always had this question since the lockdown ended: what will Black Friday be like this year? And it's going to be the big question. Is Black Friday might just be the thing that'll save or not this year, depending on what we'll be able to get and what the consumer will be able to spend.
Great, thanks, Chris. And like you mentioned, the sort of discount mentality that is sort of pulling through a lot stronger with COVID is going to be with us for a while, and the pressure is definitely coming from the end consumer, not necessarily from the retailer. Yanni, is there anything you'd like to add to what Chris has said in that space?
Absolutely. I agree 100% with everything that Chris put on the table. And it isn't about negotiating harder. It is finding that middle ground, because there is so much opportunity, and there is going to be a extended period of demand, we believe. Look, if you look at reality, the average person that is in the market for furniture has income, and it might be less, and it has to be more fit for purpose, but they are going to demand value. And at the end of the day, that is what we all, in whichever sector we are, here to provide. The opportunity, like we said before, it exists in how we collaborate across the value chain, and it's not just in the production and in the retail, but it goes right back to raw material and the availability of raw material that is going to make the differentiation. And the more clarity and the more transparency there is in the supply chain and in the total value chain, the better it's going to be for the total industry. And it's about communication, and it's about being open to communication that's going to make the difference. So I think that for me, one of the biggest things is it's always, I tend to feel, and I'm sure the other retailers would feel the same, is that we feel like the blunt arm that beats the system. But at the end of the day, it is we there to fight for the consumer, but at the same time, we're also there to facilitate the process. And as long as we're all on the same page and we work towards the same end goal, there's no reason why we, as a country and as an industry, can't use this opportunity to absolutely do a reset or do a complete step change in the marketplace. But it is going to require that, from a manufacturing point of view, that the factories put themselves out there, that they open channels of communication that haven't necessarily always been open.
Great. Thanks, Yanni. Thanks so much for sharing that. Yeah, and I think more so ever than now, we need to start getting industry collaboration going in order to actually stimulate the demand that we require for our local economy. And that kind of sort of leads into our next question, sort of pulling on, you know, the crisis has obviously impacted imports and supply chains for retailers. How significant then is the localization opportunity that might come out of that? Yanni, if I could ask you to respond there.
So exactly like we just said, it's about maximizing, and it's about using the opportunity to maximize during this current process. So in our lives, it's about diversification as well. We might have had certain mindsets in the past of there are only certain things that are worth doing in the local market. And we started challenging ourselves on that way before the pandemic hit. But what it's done is it's been a fantastic accelerator of re-examining what we do and where we get things from. And it's not just in furniture, it's across the total board of the total width of our business. So it goes back to what I said I sort of preempted myself in saying that it's about opening channels of communication to find out where the traction sits, and collaboration is most probably the most important word for us all to take seriously right now. Whether it is between retailers, whether it's retailers and manufacturers, we have to start working together in order to make a difference.
Thanks, Yanni, and thanks for sharing that. I guess then just posing the same question to you, Stefan. Do you think there's more of a localization opportunity specifically in the market that you guys service?
Okay, so see the context of my answer. I'm obviously now thinking about the Russells, a Lewis, a OK, and probably a lot of independents that's in the rural areas. So if you look at that market and segmentation of that market, let's segment it in your beds, lounge, and case goods categories. As far as beds is concerned, the beds don't get imported. So there's very little, if any, beds that do get imported. So that category, quite frankly, is mostly manufactured in the country. From a lounge point of view, in our category, as far as the stores I mentioned, once again, you will find predominantly locally manufactured. It's more your niche market, higher end product in the lounge environment. If you look at some types of cinema seating, etc., which we'll talk about a bit more later, maybe when we talk about opportunities in the market. So once again, in the lounge market, I don't think a lot, probably predominantly, so because most of it is already localized. And then in the case goods market, and Chris and Yanni will be able to help me here, but you know, if you look at the low cost market, a lot of the glass and metal used to come in from Brazil. I don't know whether it still comes in from the South America, so whether some of it comes from China as well, but it seems like China started kind of manufacturing everything. But the case goods type, looking dining room suites, pedestals, that type of thing, the glass, metal type of market, we're not very strong in South Africa. Nobody has ever really gone into massive investment as far as competing with imports in those categories. So there must always be opportunities there. Your lower end case goods predominantly, once again, already localized, already manufactured in South Africa. If you start looking at The case goods segment, that's hardwoods. Obviously, a lot of that is imported, but that's more the higher LSMs once again. So our market, I don't believe a lot of opportunity the lower end as far as imports is concerned at this stage now.
Okay, great. Thanks, Stefan. And it's interesting to see how it differs between different retailers in the market. Chris, I know you're quite passionate about localization. So maybe you could give a few pointers on what should local suppliers or manufacturers specifically do to try and unlock some of these localization opportunities?
I think we've got a couple of great examples of other South African industries that have come together, created a program and are servicing the local retailers very well. The apparel and the home textile clusters come to mind specifically. We've seen a tremendous swing in imports on home textiles over the last 5 years. From 5 years ago, it must have been north of 80% being imported, and today it's north of 70 to 80% being produced locally. That industry is really, or that sector is really well organized. And I see some of the guys are on the forum as well. And that's really made a big difference with the type of products that's been produced. Now, for at home specifically, and a lot of what Stefan said at home pretty much sits on the opposite scale of that. On the furniture side, is we're really struggling. We really struggle to find the type of product that our consumers want. It's really difficult for us to buy that type of product locally in the furniture market. Now, it's never a case of we don't want to buy local. It's always the case that the only thing that's going to change the trajectory of that line that Chris Gilmore showed in the beginning is creating employment in South Africa. And we are all passionate about that. We want to do as much as we possibly can. How do we put those two things together? So there's a few things for me. As the South African manufacturers are very close to the South African consumer. We live in the same country. We go to the same restaurants. We visit the same malls. If we want to tap into a local retailer's demand, tap into the local consumer. Understand what they're looking for. We live with them. We understand what they're looking for. And we understand the price point that they will pay, and we understand the styling that's needed. There's great creative talent in South Africa. Get together with a great creative talent in South Africa. Get together with a great design talent in South Africa and design products that are unique to South African needs and wants and tastes. What you can't do is completely rely on a retailer to do that for you. It's a really tough one. I wish I could say hand on heart that just bring your production to us, we will design everything and we will fix everything. We just won't be able to do that. But those are the elements that's needed in this mix to come together. With having said that, the door is open to come and talk to, and I want to talk on behalf of Yanni and Stefan, but certainly, yeah, the door's open to all of us. Come and talk to us, tell us what you can do. But I want to be really honest with it. Please don't come and say you can do anything, because we're not looking for anything. We're looking for something specific that the customer is looking for. If you find that magic alignment, there's great success to be had, and there are great examples in all of these businesses of manufacturers and retailers that came together and found this niche product that you decide you want to go into, and you do it really well. You can be very successful in that. It's also important to stick to what you're good at and not trying to do everything. So if you want to rather go direct to consumer and open your own online store and go in that direction, fantastic. I'm fully supportive of that. I think it's a great idea. But decide what you want to go for and then go after that thing really hard.
Thanks, Chris. I think it's something that a lot of us need to hear is, retailers do want to buy from manufacturers. It's just a matter of how do we get that collaboration going in an effective way and make sure that manufacturers are actually manufacturing the right products for the retailers.
The right product for the consumers, sorry.
Right product for the consumers. Yes, you're right. And like you said, we're in the market, we live with each other, we know what's happening in the market, so there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to design for that market too. Yanni, you were nodding your head along quite a lot. Is there anything you'd like to add to what Chris said?
I'd maybe like to address the elephant in the room, because Chris really put it very eloquently. And it is definitely from myself and my whole team, it's a thing we're extremely passionate about. And it's not just about furniture. So it is about having those conversations. But the elephant in the room for me is that there's an expectation that as retailers, we need to just do mass volume stuff. And I think one of the trends that the industry needs to embrace is the fact that customization, or a element of uniqueness, or the semblance of being able to put your own unique look together, plays a massive role, because it demands flexibility and agility from the manufacturing sector. It is not about making one thing only and making that same thing season in and season out over an extended period of time. And I have to be honest, the initial interactions that when we started on our journey with localization of especially furniture about 7 years ago, was that the producers want to make what they've always made, and they want to make it the way they've always made it. And there was very little opportunity for collaboration. And we have a massive contribution of local furniture across a spectrum of product types. But it's taken a long time to build the capacity to fit the consumer's needs, because it isn't what we want. Chris made that point as well. It's about being reactive and being preemptive to what their needs are. And with that comes change, and change can only be effective and put the runs on the board if there's flexibility and agility in the pipeline. I'm very happy we commit to raw materials for extended periods of time, but we need flexibility in order to switch between style and execution as we read the demands in the marketplace. And that again is one of those things that is extremely polarized in the current marketplace, where categories are changing demand dramatically, styles are changing demand, and we need to be able to react very fast, because the consumers are extremely picky. They want what they want, and they're not going to take second best, regardless of the sector you play in.
Great, thanks Yanni, thanks for sharing it. And again, I think sometimes we need to have these hard conversations, especially if we want to sort of jumpstart and make sure that, you know, our sector hopefully grows in the future.
If I can add one more page, sorry.
Yes.
And I think what's important is we are more than willing to talk. As a matter of fact, we're desperate to talk. So if there's anybody out there who thinks that they can work with us, please talk. We are very happy to take things slowly, to hold hands, and to develop a supply source over time. We don't expect magic overnight. What we ask for is an open mind to take a journey with us.
Okay, great. Thanks, Yanni. And I think the sentiments are the same for Chris Swart from At Home. So please, if you want to get hold of these guys, please do. And you can contact us after the session, and we can put you in touch with MRP and At Home as well. I've got a question for Bernadette. And Bernadette, maybe you could just spend a minute just talking to how the Furniture Master Plan is aiming to stimulate market demand within the context of COVID-19.
Thank you, Paige. Just to mention, the Furniture Industry Master Plan is currently still being finalized. It's in that process of being approved and finalized. But in terms of your question, in terms of how the Furniture Industry Master Plan aims to stimulate market demand, I think is already what the panelists have touched on, and that is, and I think Yanu mentioned it a number of times, That would be through collaboration initiatives, which is highlighted in the Furniture Industry Master Plan, and that will be with the various stakeholders in the industry. We've mentioned retailers and designers and manufacturers, and seeing more of a collaboration happening amongst the stakeholders in the industry. We're looking at, in the master plan, we're looking at various interventions. There are discussions underway already with the retailers. I think most of the retailers on this panel today have engaged with the master plan, and the same engagement has happened with the public sector or government in terms of stimulating the demand in the furniture industry.
Great, thanks Bernadette, thanks so much for that. So I really do encourage all manufacturers, if you haven't yet, please engage with staff here on the Furniture Master Plan, and we're hoping that it will take industry forward. We're going to...
Paige, sorry, just to also just come in there in terms of I haven't touched on, because you did say a minute and I'm going to try and steal another few seconds, but just to touch on that in terms of, and I think it was part of your questions earlier on, in terms of how do we actually, or what initiatives have been undertaken to create market access in the furniture industry. And we feel, and it's mentioned in the Furniture Market Plan, around localization. There's a huge amount of spend in the public sector on local procurement. That is spent by the state, and also once again engagement with the retailers in terms of working closely with the furniture manufacturers. And we've done that through which we've just recently launched, is an online furniture listing. So manufacturers always ask the question, how do we get in touch with retailers, or how do we access certain markets, whether it be through export interventions and initiatives like that. So we encourage the manufacturers in this session also to go onto our website and actually go and register themselves on the furniture online listing, where we actually redirect our retailers and government procurers and buyers in the industry. Thank you for that.
Great, thanks Bernadette, and I think that's a very useful resource for everyone to utilize, so thanks for sharing that. Cognizant of time, we're going to jump into the Q&A session. Excuse me while I look down at my notes. Obviously I've been following the Q&A, but my first question is for Stefan. Stefan, with the pressures on imports and the availability of imports, what support has been given to local manufacturers, especially when it comes to melamine-faced board?
Yeah, so you're talking specifically here, and I don't know whether you're really at the right place as far as that question is concerned, Paige, because the melamine board, we work more in foils if you look at the lower end of the market, and really your foil market, case good market, is predominantly local. So for us, from a lower, like I said previously, from a lower end support, I think you would find that that market is very well serviced from local suppliers. My feeling here, and you must help me, but I think from Yanni and Chris, that you would find the melamine type product more in their stores. We would probably have some of it in our upper end, like in the Rochesters of the world, but not really competing with the type of product that they have in their market. So Chris, Yanni, you must come in here if you agree with me, but I think that's probably more in your market segment.
Great, thanks, Stefan. There we go.
Agreed. Absolutely, we do, and I think that's what I was referring to earlier when I said that the board product that sits in our business is predominantly melamine or wood veneer, but we are definitely experiencing a aggravated demand for hardwood products or solid wood products as well. So for me, it's a great opportunity to fast track the development of that part of the sector, which we're looking forward to, and we're already in development with a number of people in the industry locally.
Okay, great. Thanks, Yanni. Chris, maybe I can ask the next question to you, which is, what specific products do you foresee customers demanding?
Well, I guess it's post-pandemic, the question, right?
Yeah, let's go post current and post next 12 months.
Well, you can just look at all of how all of our lives have changed. You know, I'm at the office, but nobody else is at the office, but everybody's working. So everybody's working from home. So there's your first answer. So work from home, school from home, multifunctional furniture that you can double up into one function and change to something else when needed. Function, comfort, health focus, anything that's going to help you to function in this post-pandemic world in a more productive way, but also more a conducive way of actually turning your home into something more than just a place to live, something to fulfill a couple of needs for you. Obviously, price points, if you after a value item, you've got to be really sharp on it, and if you have a flight to quality, then do the quality really well. Just referring back to the melamine question, that's not something that at home would be interested in. We're more into the solid woods, etc. Of the world. But there's a gap for everybody.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chris. I can see Stefan and Yanni smiling at some of those comments. Yanni, I've got a question for you. Which is, how will you be using digital tools to inspire consumers, improve service, and enhance consumer experience?
Or just follow our Instagram. No, I'm actually not even joking. So we are finding, and I'm sure everybody else would agree, that for our market segments, one of the most fundamental tools for inspiration is absolutely, over and above all the traditional marketing that we would normally do, is definitely Instagram is an amazing tool. It is interactive and it feeds into all the different touch points and platforms that we trade on. So we utilize that quite specifically. And I also think that if you're struggling as a manufacturer to get in touch with any one of us, just ask the question on Instagram or on Twitter, and somebody's going to feed you, push you in the right direction to the right person. I know people in general struggle to get through switchboards, but once you pose a question through social media, and I mean, I can already feel the daggers coming from behind me from our marketing team, you get a response. And it's become a way of life for all of us. And I think what Chris said earlier about, regardless of what your question is, just look at it in context of your own life. And the answer is most probably sitting right in front of you. Look at your experience or your own expectation.
Great, thanks, Yanni. And I think, you know, we can't escape the digital world any longer. It's been something we've been talking about for a long time, and we've been sort of catapulted into it with COVID-19. Which sort of leads me to my last question to the panel, which is, you know, open to anyone to respond, but we know that collaboration is key for the sustainability of the industry, but other industries as well. And are there other industries that we can learn from and implement what they've done in their industries in the furniture space?
I'll take that. Just have a look at apparel and home textiles, those clusters, how they've collaborated. I know B&M was involved in some of those, or in all of those. I think there are great case studies of how to do that that have happened recently, last couple of years.
Thanks, Chris.
I think, and if I can make a comment as well, just in terms of the full value chain, if you don't have, for instance, design expertise within your business as a manufacturer, then find a friend. There's phenomenal talent in this country, and we even play massive roles in that. So we often connect the dots between manufacturers and designers who jointly work together. And I think the answer is share the love. I think we often just get so obsessed with our own little sandpit that we play in that we don't often invite other people to come and play with us. And that is literally what collaboration is there for. And I mean, we've had phenomenal ones. I obviously can't share too many exact details, but we have phenomenal wins ongoingly and have had for an extended period of time by bringing various people with different expertise into the fold to make things happen. And definitely the Barney sharing and caring is alive and well.
Brilliant, thanks. And thanks for being willing to collaborate with industry, to all of you. I think it's very important, and we need to keep these open channels of communication going. I am cognizant that we are a few minutes over, so I'm going to close the Q&A session for now, but we have noted all the questions that have come through in the Q&A, and we will be working to try and respond to as many of those as possible when we send the feedback to all of the attendees for today's session. So I just want to say a massive thank you to our esteemed panel for joining us today. It's no small feat to put yourself out there, especially in front of a virtual room full of manufacturers. So we're really appreciative of all of you coming and just spending time with us today. A little bit of quick housekeeping just to all of the attendees in today's session. We are going to be doing a similar session to the one we've done today, except we'll be focusing on bespoke and corporate furniture, and that will be on the 9th of September. So please make sure to register for that when the invitations go out. And we would love your feedback. So you'll notice that when you leave this Zoom meeting, a pop-up will arrive in your browser. It's a short survey just to do a quick quality check on today's session, so please take a few seconds to respond to that. If you'd like any more information on the Ethekwini Furniture Cluster or on any of the content discussed today, you're welcome to email us. And we also just ask that you be aware that we will be circulating a COVID survey in the next couple of months that we would really like industry to respond to, so we can continue to host events similar to this one and really benefit industry as we go along. So again, a massive thank you to all our panelists and our attendees. We are going to close today's session, and you will receive the recording and notes after today. But thank you very much, everyone, and we trust you have a good rest of your week.